right in 1982. I have a night
to Des Moines.
meeting. I'll
and
be
then
back.
And so like, when I was
all that
dropping
kind of
them
good
off,
stuff.
thank God, they were like, the flight was
My son
delayed.
is 4, and he tolerates these to a point. I get about 2 nights a week, and then he is just
And then it
like,
was midnight.
Yeah.
no,
we're
ma'am,
canceling
we will
it.
be here for, it's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah,
And
I
then
have
they're
3
like, but you
girls,
can fly home
4, 8, and 10.
at,
So
4
I
o'clock. So it was like
get
24
that.
hours
Yeah.
later.
Like,
So
okay.
then you're stuck in Des Moines. The fair,
get
the
2 a
out-of-state
week.
fair is worth going to see. It is a great fair.
Price situation. Yeah, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Clay.
Clay, it's nice to meet
Nice to
you.
meet you. Glad we have this opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
How many months has it been?
9 months on Tuesday, so tomorrow. Thank you.
That's great.
I know I can't use the whole if it was a baby it wouldn't even be born yet, so I'm gonna start being like, well, if it was a baby it wouldn't even be sleeping through the night yet.
All right, we're
So,
gonna get going.
Most importantly, you got through a winter.
Hello and welcome to the Town of Hartford
Winter.
Affordable Housing Town Hall. I'm Joe Major, the Vice Chair of the Hartford Select Board and your moderator for this evening. Affordable housing is an issue that plagues Hartford in so many levels, both the rental market as well as home ownership. How do we get there? What is our status now? And is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Tonight is intended to highlight those challenges and then explore policies and strategies that can lead to solutions. We will do this with our panel. Andrew Winter is the Executive Director of Twin Pines Housing. He oversees all facets of operations for nonprofit housing development for the organization that specializes in affordable housing serving the Upper Valley. Now, Andrew is a lawyer, and we will not hold that against him. He is also a board member of the National Housing Assistance Council. Clay Adams is the Chief Executive Officer at Mascoma Bank. Previously, Clay was the CEO at Simon Pierce. Clay holds an MBA in Business Administration from Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. Previously to his stint at Simon Pierce, Clay had spent a decade with White River Junction-based strategic counseling firm RSG. Kristen Connors is the general manager of Vermont, the modular home manufacturer designed specifically for low and moderate income individuals. She holds an associate's degree in business administration and a bachelor's in business management from Johnson State College. Kristen is currently working on obtaining her project management degree. Lori Hirschfeld has been the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Hartford for close to 25 years. The department is responsible for all town activities related to current and comprehensive planning, including zoning, land use, historic preservation, conservation, housing, energy, transportation, and community and economic development. Is there anything else that you're responsible for, Laura? Lori has a master's degree in community planning from the University of Maryland. Go Terps! And 29 years of community planning and development experience. First in the Baltimore, Washington area, and more recently in Vermont. Tracy Yarlett Davis is the current town manager for Hartford. A native of Northern California, before coming to Hartford, Tracy was the lead auditor for the city of Berkeley. She is a graduate of Mills College, where she obtained her master's degree in public policy. As town manager, she oversees the operations of the town government while managing over 100 employees. Megan Mosley could not be here with us today, but she sends her deepest condolences. Now, if you have a question for our panel, please, I'm going to ask you to come up to the mic and ask those as we go along. Our town hall will be about an hour and a half, so feel free to do it as we go forward. And I will start our question for our panel. How might Hartford create policies that address the scarcity of affordable housing? Anyone now? Lori?
All right. So, so one of the things that I think we all need to recognize is that we're in this together. It's a sense of community. It's a sense of being in partnership with people. The scarcity has many different tentacles, and so mine tends to be from the perspective of being part of the public agencies, part of that community. So when I look at it, I think about it in terms of what can we do for a community conversation that propels us moving forward in the direction of action. We've had a lot of discussion over the years about that, and we've been doing some things about that in recent years as well. But most recently, some of you may have tuned in the last couple of weeks to the select board meeting, and we're going to be embarking on a thorough discussion through an update of our town plan on the housing section, and we're also going to be digging into our zoning regulations and any other regulations that may be applicable. But for me, my goal right now is to get into action. We know we have a lot of good ideas out there, a lot of things that we can quickly move into action, and some that are more your short-term, mid-term, and long-term. Being a planner, I always speak in those terms. So anyway, that's kind of a quick and dirty from my perspective.
Thank you, Lori. Andrew, you always hear of Act 250 and how that is a hindrance to housing development in not only Hartford, but Vermont. What exactly is Act 250, and how does it hinder housing development?
So Act 250 is the state of Vermont's comprehensive zoning law, and it really is designed to, provide a check on and a review of development of a certain size, if it's commercial, and if it's residential, any project over 9 units has to go through Act 250. Now, there are a number of carve-outs, if you will, from Act 250. So one of the big ones is if you're a priority housing project. So if you're an affordable housing project and you're providing affordable housing to folks, you may be able to get out from the further review of Act 250 if you're in a community of a certain size, like Hartford, and you're doing a project in certain neighborhoods or certain parts of the community, village centers, designated growth areas. You can, because you're going through zoning there, you may not need to go through Act 250. But it is something that, for developers, we hear market rate developers who say, yeah, I don't like Vermont because of Act 250. But it's an important tool for the state and the kind of growth that we have here in the state. So something that we're always looking at, thinking about. I think having priority projects like those that Twin Pines does that don't necessarily have to go through Act 250 is a good step because there is that additional layer of review that's going on at the municipal level. So I don't know, Lori, if you want to touch on Act 250, your feelings on Act 250?
Well, I think one of the things you touched on, I just want to elaborate. We do have a growth center in Hartford, and if you can imagine where pretty much we have all water and sewer on within the town water and sewer, it has to be contiguous, so we can't grab Queechee area to be part of that growth center. We tried, but they wouldn't let us. And so right now, because we just went over the 10,000 mark in terms of population, for us the kickoff is that we are able to reduce the amount of Act 250 permits, just the things that you were speaking about for affordable housing as well as for mixed use and income housing. And so that's 100 units. That's pretty good. So we've got a lot of area where we do want to focus development because it's within our concentrated village centers and our downtowns, and where we have a lot of our resources, access to public water and sewer. We have good transportation systems of what we do have, that they are focused in those areas. So that's one thing that we do have as a benefit in Hartford. And in fact, I just submitted today our 2020 update for our growth center. So we're keeping it up to date so we can continue to do this. So that's all I would.
Clay, you talk to a lot of business owners in the Upper Valley, and I would suspect that they say that workforce housing, quite frankly, is a detriment not only to Hartford but to the Upper Valley. What are they telling you, and what are they saying that some of their needs are going forward?
So a couple thoughts. I think in a lot of businesses of any size, you're almost seeing desperation in the eyes of the business owners or leaders because they can't find people to employ. And these are not just new businesses starting up trying to find people, but they're very well-established, well-run, good employers who pay well. And a big part of that is because of the absence of housing that can provide a place for someone to have a roof. And I think one of the things that I've learned over time is to try to stay away from labels. And whether it's workforce or middle income or affordable, people occupying all of the above are employed. They're working in our municipalities, they're working in our restaurants, they're working in our medical providers. And so I think it's important to have housing that people can pay and have a reasonable amount of their income toward going toward that housing. And if you think about the average median income in a county like Windsor, you're going to have 50% to 80% of that average median income be somewhere between about $13 and $25 an hour, roughly speaking. And so you have to create housing that people who are earning that can have a place to call home.
You didn't want to get into labels, but this is exactly what I'm going to do. So there's some advocates that conflate affordable housing and workforce housing. The combination of homelessness, low income, and middle class needs together. But such an approach sufficiently address the complexities of what the needs are, or are those issues separate?
I was going to say, the great thing is that there probably are opportunities in all spaces. We've been doing some housing. I think a lot of people think of Twin Pines as, oh, you're only doing affordable housing, and we do. We're developing a variety of housing types. Those from transitional housing to housing for the homeless to housing for working folks who need something that they can afford and may qualify as low and or even moderate income, and to true market housing. And so we're kind of doing everything, and we're doing everything including home ownership and housing for seniors. So we sort of cover the waterfront in that respect. But one of the things that we're always trying to do is look at opportunities to develop mixed income housing. And so an example of that right here in Hartford is the project that we did. We just finished the second phase of, and that's Wentworth Community Housing on just off of Sykes Mountain Avenue. That's a project where we've got 51 units of housing. It includes some subsidized units, but it also includes units that are affordable. So those are typically affordable to households at or below 60% of the area median income. So that might be, a family making $35,000, $40,000 a year. And then we've got units that are affordable to households making as much as $94,000 a year. So it's a mixed income opportunity. But there are also projects that we develop that are really focused on a certain population. So we did a project a few years ago in Lebanon for people who were dealing with, who were chronically homeless. 18 units focused on the chronically homeless with services provided by the Upper Valley Haven in conjunction with Twin Pines staff. And so there really is a need, I think, to have a variety of housing types. It's not just one flavor, one kind of housing, but really having a variety.
I don't want to take up all of the questions. Does anybody here in the audience have a question that they'd like to have? Please, come on up to the mic, please.
and I had emailed a question to you, but I had some others. One is, I'm wondering where the town, wondering where the town stands on impact fees now for development. You know, as far as helping pay for additional services as we get more people in Hartford. And should I ask my other question?
Well, let's address that one, and then we'll stay up and we can have the other question.
I would have to bounce that one to Lori because impact fees are way beyond my time with 9 months under my belt. So I'm going to do what I do a million times a day, which is go, Lori, tell me about the history of impact fees in the town of Hartford.
Almost 22 years, and yes.
So,
You did it way before your time.
So the impact fees were put in a recess mode about 3-4 years ago, maybe. Gosh, COVID does blur my mind in terms of time frame. And so they were, so we are not charging them currently. It is something that the select board could take back up because they weren't completely abolished forever and ever, but they were like put into a recess. And the concern was that they were hindering development. I think that's something that you could look back on and see whether or not there's a difference. I'm not sure that I've seen that it made a difference one way or the other. From my perspective, but there may be more of an empirical analysis that would tell the story more clearly.
Yeah, so it is something that as taxpayers, we could bring back to the select board and say, we understand this has been in recess this time. Could we bring this forward again?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, okay. And, I have to look at my notes, because also COVID brings.
But could I just add one?
I just wanted
Yeah.
to clarify that, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could I just add one footnote
Sure.
to that? It might be interesting to talk to the development community here on the impact fees, but because one of the things that we could do, if you talk about impact fees, is looking at what is it generating, okay? If, we do have a provision within our zoning regulations, for example, that if you're going to do affordable housing or you're doing something in a particular area, we can relax some of the rules. So that, it
So it
could
can
be
be
looked at,
income-specific.
it could be looked at as, there are ways to do that.
Yep.
The state does that in terms of assessing value for affordable housing and that kind of thing. So it could be used as a tool to encourage investment from the private sector.
Yep, and I would be all for, I should have started off by saying this, I am all for more affordable, like truly affordable housing, which I realize as a term is not defined. You have to actually ask the specifics about what income levels are we talking about.
Yeah.
And I wanted, when you say we tried with Queechee, but they wouldn't let us, who was the they?
Well, the rules of becoming a designated growth center, it has to be contiguous. And so you have to meet certain criteria. And in fact, we wanted to capture even a little bit more of the area, and then they pared it back down for us and said, well, they wouldn't approve it. And that was the state. It is a
Was it the
state
state or Two
designation.
Rivers, or
It's a
both?
state designation.
Okay, and contiguous meaning?
Meaning that you can't have areas within it that are very rural in nature and then hop on down the road to another area that's a village center.
Okay, even though they
Typically,
have sewer, they have infrastructure.
right, because it has to be all in one boundary. They
So we
would
would
consider
adjust
that.
that with
And
the
you can
state.
only get one designated growth center per municipality.
Okay,
So,
thank you. And my other thing is, when people talk about Act 250, I've seen this wording a lot of times, and I'm bothered by it. When you talk about Act 250, historic preservation, neighbors, is in a fairly recent Valley News article that I would say was more than slanted, are often described as hindering development. I don't like that terminology. There are concerns that are the reason why people come to meetings, why Act 250 exists, why historic preservation and Section 106 are there. And I would say they're considerations that are necessary. I realize we may all differ on opinions with this, but I don't care for the terminology that they are hindering development and they are hindering housing. So I would just like to mention that, and I'll save my other one.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Kristen, you have a tremendous product, and I find it not being used enough. Why do you think that is?
I mean,
And
personally.
you can brag on your product as much as you
Yeah.
want to as well.
I'm very modest. No, I mean, personally, I think, number one, we've spoke to this, it's an educational piece, right? So, learning how to change the way you live and being less of an energy hog, reducing.
Can you first describe what Vermont homes are?
Okay, yeah, so we build net zero, energy ready, efficient homes. They are all electric homes offset with solar. So no fossil fuels are being put into the atmosphere as you're trying to heat your home. Particularly in New England, we know we're always cranking the heat up, and then we're cranking the AC up, and then, all of that stuff. So our homes are built basically to withstand weather, which is winter. That seems to be 9 to 12 months of winter around here. So when we first started, we started after Hurricane Irene, when a lot of the mobile homes were really taken out and impacted. And mobile homes really aren't built for New England weather. They're pretty much built for Florida weather. So the concept kind of took off with that, and then the idea of it really grew from just the mobile home replacement to people who were actually passionate about what we were doing and why we were doing it. Of course, as we grew, the educational piece of educating people on what we're doing and why we're doing it really kind of didn't follow as quickly as it should have, as we're growing this incredible business. I think the hardest part is with something that's new and a company that's emerging out into the public, you kind of hit all those roadblocks of being the first people to do stuff, right? So the appraisers are still learning how to do it. Banks are still learning how to lend the money to you to do it. People who are living in them are still learning how to live in them. And also, we're not a $30,000 mobile home that somebody can step into today and kind of walk away with it, right? So we're a pretty reasonably high product up front, but the longevity of the product, the life cycle of the product stabilizes as you live in it. So I built one for myself in Hartford. I have solar, it's all electric. I could use more solar because I have kids who don't understand the concept of turning lights off. But I mean, I personally would never sell anything that I wouldn't live in. And I love my house and I love what we're doing. So I think it's educating people on the importance of what we're doing. Everywhere else kind of on the west is already there. And I always say it's like the trickle down effect here. Even when I was younger, something that happened in California, we wouldn't feel the effects of how cool it was until like 10 years later, living here as a teenager. So I think we're starting to now kind of move into that, where we're seeing, hey, we have one of the biggest areas in the country really that has the highest carbon footprint. Because it's so cold, we're burning wood, we're burning the propane, we're burning the oil. What can we do to offset that and kind of do our part? So that's what we're trying to do, one house at a time.
Tracy, obviously you came from that part of the country.
They're cool. They're cool.
Yeah, cool.
Can you speak to that a little bit? Some of the things that you saw in California that may help Hartford and obviously the Upper Valley.
Definitely. I think some of it is the environmental consideration of the winter and seeing the wood and the fuel being burned, but knowing that we have to get there. And oftentimes I think that it's not a perfect system. Our entire grid is not electrified, but it's one less piece of emissions that we're putting in the air. So if we're not burning heating oil, even though that electricity could come from a more fossil fuel based energy producer, we're still cutting that cycle off at its feet. And I think that one of the things that I've been really impressed with Vermont and with some of the other ideas that are coming up is that I might have come here and am leaning into the quintessential Vermont experience, but not everybody needs acreage, not everybody wants acreage, not everybody needs or wants a house from the 1800s, and we're going to see a bunch of different people coming in, and a bunch of people who might want a different experience in their own life. They might want to sell that big 4-bedroom 1880s Victorian that they have on the hill, because a Vermont is going to be easier for maintenance, easier to take care of, They can maybe put a couple of remods and take care of a friend or a neighbor who also needs housing. So I see it as more of a not a single shot, but more of a buckshot of all of these different ideas that we're bringing forth to the table that also let people know that their upfront costs are going to be this, and we're also going to help them out with 5, 10, 15 years down the line in terms of their energy costs, because we can get somebody into a home, but the first time they get that multiple $100 heating bill in the wintertime, we're going into a cycle of poverty, and we're going into a cycle of not being able to pay your bills and working really hard and maybe falling back into being unhoused. If we can make these bills more affordable for them along the long front and make their lives a little more even keeled in terms of their expenses, then that's helpful. You can budget better and you can make a go of it all.
Clay and Andrew, you both have organizations that work regionally. We tend to work in silos as towns. We do, and that's just a fact. How can we, and when I say we, I mean town government here in Hartford, work with other towns to make this more of a regional project, a regional issue to solve?
I'll take a couple thoughts on that. I know there have been more active conversations over the past several years. I know Vital Communities convenes a group of municipal leaders. I think, Tracy, you're a participant in that. So it's rather a novel thing, which is kind of shocking that this has only happened in, say, the past 10 years, when one town manager would speak to another town manager or town administrator or whatever it is, because really these things are regional. The employment scene, the commuting scene is all regional. The agriculture is regional, but and in Vermont and New Hampshire, the county and the regional governments do not have a lot of power. So I think the more that the towns can talk between and among themselves, the better it's going to be able to address housing needs, even whether that is partnering up on infrastructure, water, sewer, things like that, or power or transportation, because wildlife patterns don't change just because a town line is there. So I think that is a big opportunity. And I think also talking and partnering with the employers who really are, and I talk to a lot of them, are very interested in having those types of conversations, not just among themselves, but with talking with municipal leaders to make sure that there is good communication going back and forth on that as well. So those are just two things that come to mind for me that any town could be doing, and I think the town of Hartford is not any different than those other towns.
Yeah, no, I think the community conversations that are taking place between municipal leaders are really helpful. I think, Vital Communities is to be commended for trying to really put a spotlight on practices and opportunities, and there really are some amazing, efforts elsewhere in both New Hampshire and in Vermont to try to get communities engaged. I mean, conversations around ADUs. Are there ways to make accessory dwelling units, so smaller dwelling units that are contiguous to or on the same lot as the primary dwelling unit, making those, figuring out ways to make that process easier. And those kinds of conversations are going to be really important going forward, because no one community is an island unto itself. It really isn't, and we need to encourage those kinds of conversations and collaborations and exploring opportunities to learn from other communities.
We are in the middle of a pandemic.
Oh, we are?
Yes, believe it or not.
I did not know.
That's why I'm wondering about all these masks in the audience. How much has that contributed to where we're at now?
I mean, I can speak to trying to keep housing affordable and trying to build affordable housing in a world where the building costs keep going like this. I can't, and I won't pass that type of increase off to my customers, right? Because that's just not who we are as people. My uncle is very passionate about affordable housing and really workforce housing. So every day I seem to get a letter like, oh, we're going up 15 to 20% on materials, and we can't keep passing, keep affording to bury this in our costs. And I'm like, well, I definitely can't keep burying it in my costs. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Number one, you're trying to build affordable housing. Number two, in an area where me personally, I'm competing against, the Dartmouth College, the hospital, all of the employees that I'm trying to get in an already tough market to find help, right? So trying to find people to work. And then we're one of the smaller few people who actually have rentals. We build the houses and we have rentals. Most of our employees live in the rentals that we provide. So we keep it affordable housing for our employees as well. So I kind of feel like we're in that position where we're trying to build houses, we're trying to keep it affordable, we're trying to keep business running, and we're trying to keep our employees in a house that's still affordable. So if you have an answer to how to do all that,
That's why you're here.
I'll be the first person to come to you for the answers, but, I'd like to figure out how we can get creative as a community to work with one another, because I think that's the only way you're gonna make it through a pandemic, is working together as a community on all aspects, whether it be Twin Pines, Mascoma, the town, and me. We're a collective collaboration. Not me against Andrew trying to see who can build the most energy efficient homes. I think it
That's a good competition. Let's
Yeah.
let's work that one. Let's work that one.
But I think that's the only way it's gonna be successful in this town, is know that we're all in this together.
Please, Lori.
So I think, I so thoroughly agree with what you're saying, but there's another piece to that, is that it has brought to the surface an urgency. And it also has brought to the surface creative ideas of how do we address this that we may not have thought about before, or we may have thought about before, but now somebody's listening more so than they had been before. So one of the things I just want to touch on is again, looking at what you can do in stages. ADUs, accessory dwelling units, are something that there are mechanisms to get housing out there quickly in an affordable way. You don't have to necessarily build new. You may have a house that's a 4-story house, or, a larger home, that you want to take a section of that and create a new dwelling unit within it. And it serves many different purposes. It's not only getting additional housing out there, but it may help someone who is entering into their more senior years. I can say that now because I have. And you start to look at the fact of, what's my next stage in life? Where do I need to be? Is a multi-floor house the right thing for me? Can I carve out a little apartment here that maybe I can rent now, but I can transition into that, and then somebody else can rent the larger part of the home? That's something. What?
Can you speak to what that process looks like to somebody who is a homeowner
Right.
thinking about doing that? What does, not everybody knows these steps, so.
Right, and so that's, this is one of the projects I'm launching, because, and it's through a regional, and not just a state regional, but a multi-state regional effort. We had our first major public meeting 2 weeks ago, and really talking about what are different ways in which this is being done around the New England area.
It's huge in
And there are, people need that assistance in trying to figure out how to maneuver through it. So I need some money. We apply for money, we find where we can get some money within our existing budget or whatever to set up a pilot project. I'm gonna put an ad out, ask 10 property owners who are interested in exploring this with me. We'll waive fees, we can do all kinds of stuff to get it into seeing how it's going to work here. And there are places that we can tap into without having to create the wheel, that are already doing these groups that could help facilitate getting through that process. Having on staff an architect, getting some technical assistance for free, getting somebody to think about it. There was something actually out of California, maybe it was out west, I'll have to go look at my notes, where they were actually, came up with a format design by an architect and an engineer. It got through the permitting process, and here it was. here's 4 different,
It's like the original Sears catalog, and you would just
Right.
go and kind of pick your ADU and show up and
Exactly,
say, I
right.
want to
And-
put this down right
and you
here.
can put it down here. So there's lots of ideas out there that I say we need to jump into, and we need to find the way to make it work. Do pilot projects, it's the best way to try and figure out what works and doesn't work, and create the partnerships like we are doing here. Woodstock is ready to start launching something, I've been in touch with them, and to see what can we do. So, but at the same time, we've got to get the longer range housing out there too. Because this is just a type of housing that will meet one housing need within the community. And we've talked a little bit about what are those different needs. You know, we are in a more of a housing crisis now because people who had access to lower cost housing don't have it, because people who had access to middle or upper income housing don't have it, so they're buying the lower cost housing and investing dollars into it and refurbishing it. So it's a cyclical thing. So if you only focus on one piece of that cycle, you're never going to get out. You're just going to keep running around in circles. So they're complementary, they do work together. So those are just some of the ideas, but before I kind of take up all the time here, I've got a lot going on in my head about this. It'd be really great to hear what other people are thinking too, on the panel or out in the audience, so.
Please, Becca.
Thank you. Becca White, I'm one of your state representatives, if we haven't met. Well, first off, I want a Vermont-made ADU on my Twin Pines Housing Trust affordable housing home funded by Mascoma, permitted by the town. So if you guys could get together, help me with that.
Consider it done.
It's fine, we'll get it, House Tuesday, and that's tomorrow, it'll be fine.
And I am very grateful for this conversation. I live in an affordable housing home through the homeownership program through Twin Pines Housing Trust. So thank you for that. My question, it hasn't come up yet, so I wanted to see if this is on folks' minds, but short-term rentals come up a lot for me with constituents, where both they're benefiting from a short-term rental, like an Airbnb, they're making extra income, but at the same time, that's taking housing off the market. So I'm wondering what your reflections are on that, and if we should be doing anything about it on a town or state level.
Thank you, Becca.
A couple of things come to mind when we talk about short-term rentals, which is that it definitely can be an income driver for folks who have the means and the ability to use it as a way to bring in income. But it does also remove housing from the rental market. From my perspective, in terms of us legislating that or taxing it, Airbnb is bigger, badder, and has way more layers than we can ever hope to have, and they hold their data really close to their chest. When other municipalities have gone after them, you basically have to pay a third-party software coder to pull data from Airbnbs on the front end to find out who your Airbnb tenants are. So in terms of if we were looking to tax people who have Airbnbs, we're looking at a pretty big lift administratively, and probably it's not a lawyer battle that I would want to go up against Airbnb. They've fought bigger organizations, Seattle, San Francisco, and they've won. So I would hesitate from the town manager perspective to say, let's go up and let's see what we can do in terms of legislating Airbnb or other short-term rentals or taxing them. It's hard. I see both sides of it. I see that we could say that that's removing rental units from the market. I could also see people saying, well, this is how I make my money, and I do give back to the community, and I pay my taxes just like everyone else. And I think that it would probably, I lean on the fact that I don't think we're going to tax our way out of this problem. I think we got to build more housing. We can't make it harder for you to own a home. We can't make it harder for you to come to the Upper Valley. We're gonna shoot ourselves in the foot in a few years if we don't get more economic growth and development, and that nice cycle of young families coming to buy their Subaru from White River Subaru and put their kids into Dothan Brook and spend their money at the co-op and all of those things, go to Vermont and get their house and put it on their land and all of those things. So we have to continue that progress, and to clamp down on Airbnbs seems to have more unintended consequences for a community like ours than we anticipate. Now, if I was sitting in a different town in Vermont, if I was sitting up in Stowe, maybe even Woodstock, we'd be having a slightly different conversation. I would still be absolutely terrified to go up against the behemoth that is Airbnb.
Speaking of rentals, will the rental market stabilize? It is ridiculous
Gonna
right
crash.
now.
It's gonna crash if we don't pull it together, I think. You know, you can't keep, I'm gonna already have to go through and raise my rents at least 10%, which is something we have not done, right? So my rentals go anywhere from, I think the cheapest one I have is $675, one of my tenants pays, and it goes up to.
Is that a studio or one bedroom?
Yep, studio. And it goes, and she's been, like, she actually came with the building when we bought it. So that's how she kind of kept that number. But, you know, and it goes up to $1,500, which is the most expensive one that we have, which is our towers, which you either love or hate in the town of Hartford. You know, but, and to speak to that, I mean, you know, the tax structure of some of these apartment buildings is kind of one of the reasons why I have my kind of affordable, low-income housing parts, and then I have the towers that I'm trying to also rent out. And I have to rob from some of these apartment buildings to pay for other apartment buildings. You know, so I've got $25,000 in property taxes on 4 units on the towers. And then I have a 7-unit apartment building, which I pay $8,000 for, so, in taxes. So you kind of have to sit back and think, well, how am I going to justify all these people and where they're living and charge all these different numbers, but still keep the rents low? I mean, we choose not to rent to, no offense, the Dartmouth students or the traveling nurses, because, you know, I am 6th generation in the town of Hartford, so I believe in keeping my people in my town, right? I want them to be able to live here. I want them to be able to work here, and I want them to be able to afford to live here. But I can only do that and subsidize it for so long, because I'm not Twin Pines, right? So I can't subsidize that cost with grants and incentives and stuff like that. So for me, it's trying to figure out, how do you continue to develop and build in the town and keep the taxes low enough to keep the prices affordable? You know, it's funny you mentioned the ADUs. My uncle just built a house with an ADU for my grandparents, because it was the promise that you will not be living anywhere other than next to me, right? You will age where in place with us. And so it kind of goes back to that generational living, you know, 40, 50 years ago, you lived together as families. Mom, dad, grandma, all of you were living together and supporting one another. You were helping watch kids. You really didn't have to worry about that. One of the big things we did was we went up and bought a trailer park in West Fairleigh. And the idea was to turn that into a complete park of Vermont's, right? And get back to that community living where you support one another. You live together in a community with a community garden, and you're doing what's right for your area and your community. And I think that's the key part of it, is getting back to the basics and stop thinking that we have to have the biggest and best house in the Upper Valley to be sustainable, because I don't think that's how we're gonna survive this.
Anyone else?
Just to put a little bit of data to it, the vacancy rate in the rental markets, healthy is considered around 5%, and we're down at 1% or below.
I was gonna say, there cannot be
And
vacancies.
in even the for sale market, the supply and demand is generally 6 months of inventory. It was measured in weeks earlier this year for home sales, and these are kind of regional, this isn't just Hartford. And it's gotten a little bit better this fall, but it's still not nearly at equilibrium. And so it's great if you're trying to sell a home or you're a landlord, but the real problem is getting back to what Tracy was saying, is like, we have to bring units at every point of the spectrum on the market. And there's not so much in migration. There is, and it's been, during the pandemic, back to an earlier question, it has grown, but we are not like the Southwest. It really is a function of supply not coming on the market. And that's the biggest challenge we have, as I think, as a region as it applies to housing.
And if I could just add that, I think what we're experiencing isn't just something from the pandemic. Those numbers were things that we experienced going back since I started working here 25 years ago. And you have times where it's a little bit better than others, but we really have not created, back 10 years ago when we did our last really in-depth analysis, we were seeing that gap between what people could afford and what their salaries were, and that gap just keeps growing. And then we had the recession, the Great Recession, and the housing market collapse, and we got even further behind. And we can't just keep doing it the same old way that we've done it in the past. And I think that's why you are working with a group that's really trying to get an infusion of other dollars in there, rather than trying to rely on the very limited public dollars that are available. And that would probably be great for you to talk about.
Not to give you a nudge or anything.
What I'll say about that is that some of the region's larger employers are thinking about how they can bring capital to bear to help this, really in this more moderate income range of housing, because they're not able to find employees, or they're being turned down by employees after they've accepted jobs because they cannot find homes. And that's again, at every point of the spectrum, whether you're earning six figures or whether you're really just kind of getting started out. I'd love to live in the Upper Valley, but I can't move there because I can't find a place to live. And that's, I think, as I think about this as a person who runs a regional financial institution, the vibrancy and the vitality of this region will suffer over time if we are not able to attract employees. People will not want to base jobs here or companies here, and I think that it's a longer-term existential question, in my view, and we all collectively have to work on addressing this.
Kim, did you have?
Thanks. Kim Souza, Hartford. Just one question. I sent Joe a few questions, but the first one was relating to the state's new rental registry. And I'm wondering if any of you can speak to what kind of impact that would potentially have on the rental market, as also a recent acquisition of a 5-unit rental property financed through Mascoma Bank, for which every realtor and everyone we talked to said, you have to jack up the rents, you have to jack up the rents, and thus far we haven't had to, but ultimately maybe a little bit. So I'm curious if any of you can shed any light on what this rental registry might be and how it will affect rentals in the region. And then also just a note about the, curious if there are subsidies available. Like, one of the things, I know Twin Pines does not just rental units, but the opportunity for home ownership in a subsidized fashion basically creates an opportunity for generational wealth. So not just generational existence, but that someone's children have more of an opportunity to own property that they might not have otherwise. So I guess, any opportunities for subsidizing based on income or other situation for property ownership, and what does the rental registry mean? Thank you.
Let's first attack the registry.
Yeah, I don't even know what that is.
So there is a proposal, there was a proposal last legislative session. It was vetoed by the governor and overridden by the legislature, and to create a rental registry. And this would be, there are certain communities that have existing registry scenarios or regimes, if you will, that were exempted. Some communities like Hartford, which do have a health officer who does inspections, would be included. I think for an organization like Twin Pines, it probably doesn't make a huge difference because we're already subject to regular inspections by state agencies. I think for individual landlords, it's a little bit more of a burden. I think the final number was set at is it $35 per unit. But again, it's another cost, and so. But I also know that there are there are tenants who are really suffering because the landlords are not taking care of the properties, and there needs to be some mechanism whereby, you know, there's a way to enforce minimum housing standards, so.
Did it not have also to do with just the transparency of rental costs? So maybe, I'll continue this conversation.
Yeah, happy to continue that conversation. But the registry was, you know, part of what they were trying to do was get at the issue of, you know, having, not having any kind of mechanism statewide to really do this. You know, larger communities, Burlington among them, obviously, you know, has a pretty robust regime. You know, they have health officers who are going out, making sure that units are in compliance with housing standards, but there was certainly, there were gaps, and so that was the intent there. I'm happy to jump to home ownership and put a plug in for Twin Pines. So, you know, Twin Pines is fortunate here in the state of Vermont that every year we're able to access 3 or 4 grants at a minimum to provide an opportunity for somebody who wants to be a home ownership, who wants to get into home ownership. These are buyer-driven opportunities. I would encourage people to reach out to us. Steve Usley is our homeownership coordinator. He is happy to take phone calls and emails for those who are interested in those grant opportunities. These are deals where somebody goes out, they find a property, and they're able to, you know, essentially become a homeowner, even if they maybe thought that they would never be able to achieve that because they were worried about their ability to put together the equity needed for a down payment. So these funds typically are equating to about 20% of the cost of a home. You know, if it's a $400,000 home, nope, it's not going to be there. But for a lot of folks, being able to find a starter home and get started in home ownership is a real challenge. So we work with banks like Mascoma, Ledyard, and others, you know, in our region to try to make people homeowners. And then beyond that, I will say we're doing a 4-unit home ownership project in the town of Woodstock right now. And again, you know, looking to create new home ownership opportunities for folks, because we do think that's an important part of the housing fabric in our community. It makes, you know, it gets people invested in the long term in their communities. So it's a really great opportunity.
Clay.
I have a question about the.
And we've done some Vermonts. Yes.
the
So I was
Twin
gonna
Pines one.
say that. So they've definitely done Vermonts too.
So the concept behind yours is that it's a down payment assistance, right?
Correct.
So I actually benefited from buying a piece of property that had a mobile home on it for my family, and took part in the CHT, you know, equity grant that they had. Silent second mortgage. So that money closed out and got funded to my bank as I did a construction loan, right? So all the money was sitting in one pot and got paid out as we built. What I have found with the Twin Pines one is that although it's supposed to be a down payment, it's really not tailored to somebody who is building a home, right? So that money that should essentially get put into the pot with the closing entity, whoever it be, whether it be USDA, whether it be Mascoma, and then gets funded at the end, it doesn't seem that it works that way when you have a loan that is essentially a construction loan. Is there any way to get creative where that money actually does go to the bank, and then at the end, somebody like myself is not sitting around waiting for the last $44,000 from Twin Pines to get paid after we've already closed on the house?
Sure. So, you know, I think the short answer is there may be something we can do in the long term, but these are policy decisions that are driven by state agencies. So we actually were not the original source of those funds. They come to us from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And so, you know, when we work with them, they have parameters. They want to make sure that the project is built and that it's funded. And then they come in with typically, you know, their funds, the last piece to pay out the loan. Again, you know, I know that there was a particular challenge with one of the projects recently that we did with you all, and happy to work with you, you know, and look at whether there's something that we can do at the state level to change the policy.
I'm not just saying it's just you guys, you know, I'm just saying in general, all of these policies that seem to come to play. You know, as a small business owner, I can bend the rules, right? So if I want to build somebody a house because it's the right thing to do, I will essentially take that, sorry Clay, and put it on my line of credit and build that house through Mascoma Savings Bank, right? And it sits on that line of credit for at a 6% interest rate that I don't pass on to the customer, but I do it because I believe in our mission and what we're doing. So as the pieces come in, the money comes in from this entity and that entity, and I start to pay down to Clay the money.
Not to me personally.
Not him personally, but I can tell you that your employees are calling me regularly looking for where their part is. I think that there needs to be, as we talk about working together, if you want somebody like me to build these homes for people, there's got to be a better way that all that money comes in at once and doesn't get piecemealed so that I'm continuously playing line of credit or playing banker kind of to get that project moving. I think that's a huge thing, and I'm not saying that it's you standing behind there telling me no, but it is working in, you know, I always say Vermont is such a backward state. We're so, yes, let's do this, and then when we get ready to do it, it's like, we kind of have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get there. So I think there really should be a way to figure out how we can work together to get to that point where we're all.
I am always happy to work together.
Good.
You know, I think one of the really great things is that, you know, Vermont is a small state. We can pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, it didn't work this last time, and here's what is happening. And let's have those conversations before we do the next deal.
Yeah.
Right? Get in there
Right.
early, have that conversation, see if there's a way to push the policy, because unfortunately, you know, if it were me, I'd wave my magic wand and make things happen, and I try to do that every day. I will say, you know, sometimes you run into a state policy, and it may seem on the face of it really reasonable, but boy, you know, it gums up the works. So let's have that conversation.
We'll just have to get Craig and Gus down here when
That's
we have
right.
that meeting.
That's right. That's right.
Look at
folks
this, a
at VHB.
kumbaya moment.
There you
We're
go.
working together here. Clay, you were going to say something?
Yeah, just on Kim's point about subsidizing and kind of building ownership, I think historically speaking, everybody has in their mind, I have to have 20% down on a home. And that's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of programs out there where banks can pair with federal programs, whether it's a federal housing, FHA, or veterans. And there are a lot of where you can have a very small dollar amount down. You can accept, we just rolled out a new product that has very low fees, single digits down. It can be coming from a gift from a family member, so really trying to help people get into homes, because that is really how you start that, I think, a wealth accumulation you were speaking of, Kim. And again, it comes back to supply, because I think increasingly what we're seeing in the mortgage market is cash buyers coming in, and a seller is going to take cash and no contingencies before they say, well, I need to have an inspection, and I need to, you know, get my financing qualified, because if they have a line out the door of potential buyers, anyone who has financing is going to be secondary compared to someone who can just write a check.
Right.
So I think that is, again, a supply and demand issue.
Clay, 2 years ago, in the Valley News, you wrote a op-ed stating that the housing shortage affects us all.
Yeah.
What were you trying to convey, and do you believe that still holds today?
So it wasn't just me who wrote that. It was a group of a program within Vital Communities called the Corporate Council, and there are about 24 members of the larger employers in the region that comprise a relatively high percentage of the employment base. And collectively, we were saying that it's a problem, and this was before the pandemic, and I think it's affecting us all. And I think it's not something that's going away. Within our core set of towns here in the Upper Valley, there are more than 1,000 units permitted at this point. But within the past year, calendar year 2021, our regional planning commissions in the area did a study called Keys to the Valley. And in that study, they concluded very quantitatively, and I think on good source, that by the year 2030, we're going to be 10,000 units short of housing. And that affects, you know, not just Hartford, that affects all the towns. And so that is that disequilibrium again. What we have been doing, and what this group, we have the Corporate Council funded, and we got funding as well from a housing agency in another adjoining state, that basically we've learned that there are only about 230 units per year coming on in our region. And again, that's not just Hartford, that is a regional number, and we can show you the data that shows that. And so it's far under what we need it to be. And I think that's just to kind of not even keep our heads above water. We're still operating in a deficit.
Does anybody else have a question?
I'm Marcy Bartlett, I live in Wilder, Tucson.
Doesn't sound like it
was.
is.
Yeah, it's funky.
Just grab right a hold of it and yell.
I'm 3 days.
Oh, someone's coming down to, they're taking a look at the mic, Marcy, up in the back.
Okay then. I don't really need this, but I'm 3 days out from my COVID booster and my
Oh,
hair is beginning to work.
Here you go,
again.
we got somebody, oh, there we go. We're getting a thumbs up from the back.
The batteries are on.
Right there.
Hello, hello, testing, 1, 2, 3.
You can always use this one over here.
Yeah, Marcy, why don't you just use,
Oh, that's one.
there you go.
There you go.
So the head is starting to work again after fever and the whole bit with the booster. Yeah. So if I'm not coherent, you'll have to work with me. A couple of things. One, my husband and I bought a fixer-upper in '96 in Wilder. It was 100% financing. We had great credit and no money. That's the good news. You know, great credit, and we got a USDA rural development grant component to guarantee the 100% financing. And even though we didn't have down payment money, we had the skills within my husband in particular, to work on it. And we lived in it, and it's not for everybody, but it's what got us into a home. And that $74,000 home would probably go for $250,000 now, okay? It's paid for, we busted. And there's that element of wealth building for the grandkids, okay? Unless we need it for the nursing home, you know. We were nearly homeless prior to this, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. We had a little girl, and we were almost out on the street. So it's terrifying to be in that position. That said, we had the nerve to believe that we could do this. And I would like to hear from you about rehab for properties that can be rehabbed, and what kind of resources are available to the people who still have the nerve to move into the project and live like gypsies, like we did. We have a neighbor down the street who's doing it, and it's pretty exciting to watch. And we bring them cocoa when they're freezing and there's no heat in there yet. And it's exciting to see the neighborhood get built. We've invested everything we've got here. And we're not going anywhere. We're gonna die right there and scrape us off the floor. But not everybody can do what we did. And it's terrifying when you're in that position, and we've lived that terror.
Especially if you've seen the movie The Money Pit.
I'm offended that
We're-
you've brought up my family's autobiographical fictionalized
That
novel, The
can
Money Pit.
be like a scary situation for people. I mean, think about, they were the same thing, young couple buying a house that they thought was gonna be a great deal.
Don't get me started. We've replaced the furnace twice, the whole heating system. Then the toilet almost fell through the floor. We'll talk another day.
Yeah.
But that sense of community that we do not take for granted is something, I mean, I'm 3 days out from my booster. I should be home in the recliner because the head really doesn't work well yet. But this was important to me to be here. And it took us leveraging Jim Jeffords, Republican/independent, who's gone now, who was overseeing this program, and it was an election year. And we weren't getting any traction, and I finally pushed the buttons to get my elected official involved, and miraculously our approval came through. Not everybody knows how to do that. So whatever you can do to make it easier for the little guy, and I mean it, the little guy, who wants to put the sweat into it. We watched housing prices in the town go nuts during the pandemic. And I don't want to make a mint off our house someday. I want to be able to have it for somebody like us.
Thank you, Marcy.
I mean, I can speak to, dealing with agencies like Efficiency Vermont. They definitely have programs that are available to people who do want to take that next step in regards to efficiency, whether it be the new efficient water heater or the new windows or anything like that that's going to put you to the level that's more efficient. There are grants, rebates, incentives, and if you go on their website, they typically not only have the links to the grants and rebates, but also people who can do them for you too, who are actual contractors who work with Efficiency Vermont on that. Vermont being one of them. There's my plug.
I think one of the moments of kind of the tangled ball of yarn that we all have is, and I say this saying that, I too have washed dishes in a bathtub because there was no sink, because there was no wall, because we had put the cabinets in, because we were redoing our own kitchen, which seemed really smart at the time, and now I questioned our sanity. Is that, we're in that kind of cycle. We don't have, I don't mess around with electricity or gas, but we don't have the folks to come out to help people who can't do it all. You go to Home Depot and a sheet of plywood is, I don't even know how much anymore. And so you get into the cycle of, okay, we need folks to come in. We need to bring things to the community. If I had 15, laborers, electricians, HVAC folks, carpenters, just hanging out in the basement of town hall that I could plug in and turn on and set loose, they'd probably have a full calendar of work to do
They'd
for the
actually
next
be
year.
at Vermont working.
So it's like, but without them, we have the houses where maybe some folks have the gumption, but maybe they don't have totally the gumption, and we don't have anybody to do the work. What are we gonna do? From my perspective, one of the things that we're working on and in the town is, we do have a website from 2003, if we're being generous, right? It's clunky, it's not really intuitive. We want you to be able to come to the website, go to planning and development, click on a link, and if you're a smartphone person, you're sitting on your couch binge watching your Netflix, and you're like, oh, I want to do an ADU. Oh, look, I can pick one of these 4 layouts. Oh, I can click on over, and Moscoma has this great website. I can click right here and it's live. These are the options for me. Maybe you did get a job at Dartmouth Hitchcock, but you don't want to live in New Hampshire. You want to come to Vermont because you heard how great we are, and you come to the Hartford website, and we're going to help you understand and make it easy for you to know what your options are. If you're not a website person, you can swing by, and we got brochures in town hall, be out in community organizations. I just spoke at Bugby over lunch and let people know part of this ADU thing is if you do have that 4-story Victorian on 2 acres and it's just a little too much for you, we have an ADU option. We'll put you in the backyard. You can find somebody to basically pay off your tax bill and your second mortgage by renting out your big house that you don't really want anymore. Because part of this is education and understanding and making it easy for people to know what their options are. And that is sometimes the hardest thing. And I'm relatively young and good with Google, and I still get confused sometimes what my options are for various things. So I can't do a lot of things because I'm not as cool as these folks that are with me, but I can kind of push a way for us to get out there in all the different capacities that we all have, whether that's my 7 select board members or my department heads, or just all of us going to the community groups and knowing who we know and getting out there and letting people know we do have options. If you want to fix her up, or we can hook you up with some plywood maybe.
Ooh, that's generous.
It-
That's expensive.
I know.
Sounds good. Does anybody else have Ally?
Dennis, did you have your hand up first, though? Do you mind if I just?
Dennis is being the gentleman that he always is. And Dennis, you'll be next, I promise.
Ooh,
It's
think it
this
works
one.
now? This one should
Oh,
work?
it is?
Okay, great. I'm also very close to you. Hi, Ally Defension. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Still,
It's this one. Would you come up here, dude?
yeah, I'm gonna be one of the panelists now. No, I shouldn't be. Hi. So, I hear the phrase, and it's already come up in the panel quite a bit, public and private collaboration and partnership. And I bet everybody on this panel can speak to different examples of that. And I hear it a lot, and then I realize sometimes I'm like, I don't actually totally know what that means and what that looks like in practice. So, because it seems like the sweet spot of where we might need to be headed in a lot of different ways with lots of different solutions around this. So I'm just wondering if there are like a couple of examples. Like, I know, for instance, I went to the Wentworth open house, and I was like, oh, that like one sheet has like 10 different logos on it, right? Of like all of the different collaborations. So to sort of speak to maybe a couple of case studies of like, what is a private-public partnership that's worked really, really well, it might be something for us to kind of think about as we're continuing this work. Thanks.
Thank you, Ally.
Sure. Happy to jump in there. So, you went to Wentworth, you saw all of the finished units. To do a project like that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of partners. And I think I talked a little bit about that. But we had, the major way affordable housing I'll call it the big A, affordable housing gets built in this country is through something called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. So this is a federal resource that's allocated to the states, and then the states turn around and make it available to eligible projects. So in a state like Vermont, small state, New Hampshire, same thing. They're both small states. They get a small state minimum for tax credits. They typically have enough tax credits for a deeply affordable new construction project to do 5 or 6 projects a year across the entire state. And we're pretty fortunate here in the Upper Valley because Twin Pines works on both sides of the river. So sometimes we're actually doing projects simultaneously from the 5 to 6 project bucket in each state. But what we do is we turn around and sell those tax credits, and we typically sell them to groups like Evernorth, which used to be Housing Vermont, and Evernorth is a full disclosure, I'm on the board there. Clay is an investor, but Evernorth gets its dollars from, in many cases, banks like Mascoma and Ledyard and Bar Harbor and other banks, both regional and national, and those dollars come in as equity. So we sell the tax credits, they buy the tax credits. There's a partnership there because they're now invested in the project. So a project like Wentworth has literally millions of dollars in equity coming in, and so we don't have to borrow that money, which allows us to keep the housing that's produced affordable. But it really requires a deep partnership. Somebody like Mascoma can be a construction lender on a project. They may be an investor. And those kind of partnerships, whether it's Wentworth, whether we did a project called Tracy Street right across the river in Lebanon, West Lebanon, right near the Kilton Library. That was another project. And again, doesn't happen without that kind of partnership between public, the public funders and the, making tax credits available, and then private investors who are buying those tax credits. But it also takes municipalities getting involved. So we worked with the town of Hartford to access another pot of money, and so the town actually helped us with an application for community development block grant funding. So, all of those resources, is why when you look at the sources and uses in a project like that, it's like as long as your arm. And you're like, wait, really? This is how we build housing? Yes, this is how we build housing. It's not simple, it's not for the faint of heart. And, you know, we wish sometimes it was a little bit easier, but it really is a partnership to get things done. So happy to give you more details at any time, and, but a great case study on, you know, how it really does take a village to get some housing built.
Thank you very much. Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Hi, I'm Dennis Brown. I'm one of your select board members, and I'm pleased to see many of my colleagues here. I used to have a boss that told me that never bring me a problem without a solution. Well, I'm here to break that because I don't have a solution for what I'm about to ask. But we have these bright minds here that might be able to help. And recently there was an article in the Valley News that spoke about people that have less means, how they could ever get ahead because they usually have a hard time going out and buying the efficient electric vehicle, or Tesla would be extreme, but electric vehicle. How they, if they did get housing, how they'd get into heat pumps or make it more efficient. Along with that, winterization and insulation, to be able to buy pre-buys of fuel, bulk buying, any kind of thing that usually they're very limited or left out of that equation. Solar is probably a reach as well. So I just was curious if like I said, with these bright minds here, if they might have any ideas on folks that are struggling. Marcy touched on this about the struggles of a young couple or a young people getting started in housing, and I appreciated those comments. I know that the way I started out in '80 with my first place was through an FHA loan. That was a tremendous help to me, and so I just thought maybe these folks would have some ideas on to help people get started with that sort of thing that have less means. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone?
I'll jump in, okay. Not that I have the answer. But I think listening to the conversations that we have today are really critically important because this is where a lot of good ideas come up. Just continuing to further a conversation where no idea is a crazy idea. My philosophy is it very rarely hurts to ask. The worst you're going to get is somebody's going to say no, and you're just in the same spot you were before. So, you know, I would just encourage you all to look to see what kind of ideas you might have to answer that question. And it may not be any one answer. There is no necessarily the right answer. There may be 10 or 15 different approaches to try and see what works and see what doesn't work. Marcy, you know, the thing that you suggested here, we actually had one in Hartford for many years. It was a housing revolving loan fund, and it actually helped facilitate the purchase of some of the homes that you now oversee, which is just above the terrace area.
Yeah, Fairview Terrace.
Fairview Terrace.
That is still in effect now.
Right, and it's still in effect now, right. So we do have an influx of funds that came through last year through a repayment of a loan. The town was able to receive 50% of that repayment and put it into a revolving loan fund for economic development and housing. We haven't had the chance to really restructure the program for it to be, you know, as an outreach program, but it is something that somebody could come in and get a loan to do that, just like they would for a commercial venture, which could go towards down payment, could go towards renovations or whatever. So they're in a very small scale, and that's something that is one of the things on my list of things that I want to explore more, because we need more money. That could go in 2 or 3 applications, and it's, you know, it's gone. But that is a tool that we can use, and it's good that you're thinking of things like that, and other people may have other ideas as well, so.
I think too, what makes kind of Vermont a unique business is we kind of take people from the beginning, right, when they first are looking for a home, and we walk them all the way through until when we let go of them, right? And we never, let's get honest, we never let go of them. They're still our family. But when somebody comes in and they say, hey, we're looking for a place to live, you know, we help them go through the application process with the USDA for some of their financing. We help them access Twin Pines or the Champlain Housing Trust programs. We help them get qualified for subsidies for the solar from Efficiency Vermont or VHCB for stuff like that. So we will kind of work with you to lead you in that direction. I always tell everybody the best place to start looking is a piece of property that already has like a mobile home on it, right? Because once you buy that, you've got the, most likely, the infrastructure. You've got the power, you've got the water, you've got the sewer. And not only that, that's where the CHT grant kind of comes in. They love to give this money to people who want to take these mobile homes off of that property and replace them with a healthy, green, efficient home. So that's where we always send people. You know, raw land is very hard to find, but you can find a lot of these places that may need to be torn down and just redeveloped, and put something there that, you know, you will have something to leave behind for your family. Because buying a mobile home is like buying a car. Once you drive it off the lot and put it somewhere, it's already depreciated 50% of what the value was when you first bought it, which is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we're still in that era where we're selling homes to people like that, because I think that we should invest in our community better than that. But unfortunately, that's what people can afford sometimes. And so I think it's important to try to figure out a way to keep it affordable, to put people into healthy, efficient homes. And again, that's the teamwork me and Andrew are gonna work on together.
Clay, you run a financial institution. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's, Dennis, it's a good question, and I think you referenced the FHA loan. Like, that's a good example. The USDA loan that Marcy mentioned is a good example. There's not one size out there. You almost have to try them on the way you're trying on a shirt or a pair of pants at the store. Like, what is the right fit? And most lending institutions, whether it's a credit union, whether it's a stock bank, whether it's a mutually owned bank like Mascoma, they're gonna try to find the right product for you. It's a little harder these days, to be honest, and I'm not complaining about federal regulation, but banks have less latitude now than they did before the 2008 financial crisis to help people get into loans. There was bad stuff that happened, but it's also now sometimes the people who institutions really want to help for all the right reasons, they're a little bit more constrained.
Thank you. I thought I saw, yes, ma'am.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eva, and I'm with Upper Valley Habitat for Humanity. So I don't have a question, but I wanted to put a plug in for Habitat.
Absolutely.
I was thinking about Habitat, and I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
thrilled to be here.
absolutely.
So we focus primarily on home ownership. We're based in downtown White River Junction, and we serve the Upper Valley towns of Vermont and New Hampshire. So we basically use volunteer labor to keep the cost of the home low. So we build a home using volunteer labor. We have to fundraise the cost of the home before we start construction. And then we build the home with volunteers. Our partner family contributes 300 sweat equity hours, so they're swinging a hammer alongside community members and other volunteers. They're working alongside service providers who are either donating services or discounting them. And then we sell the home to the partner family, and all of our mortgages have a 0% interest mortgage. We hold the mortgages, and then Ledger services them for us. So there's a sweat equity component. People learn how to, they develop a sense of pride in home ownership as they learn how to build their home, learn how to use tools, and we are currently working on some smaller repair projects this fall and winter. And then in the spring, we're going to be building a new home in Lebanon for a mother with 2 children. And even though that house will be based in New Hampshire, we're still going to build it to Efficiency Vermont high performance standards. And then in it's very likely that the property we develop after that will be a lot that we own in White River Junction, and that will hopefully be a duplex. We're not entirely sure, still figuring that out, but just wanted to put a plug in for Upper Valley Habitat.
Thank you, I
Thank you.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we've partnered with two different habitats, one in Burlington and one in Massachusetts, where we have actually delivered the shell of a house up to the sheetrock and brought them to the sites, and then exactly what you said, the homeowner comes in, they do the work, the community members come in and help and do the work. So there is that option too of partnering with
Oh, good.
a local, we have that model too. So if you'd love me to build your duplex, I would be highly interested in doing that. But there are ways to get creative and do exactly that.
Tremendous. I think I saw one more hand. No?
Up here.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So it's been touched on just briefly, and I just want to follow up on it. We talk about affordable housing in the Upper Valley, and affordable housing differs greatly depending on whether you're going to be a nurse working up the Dartmouth-Hitchcock making $38 an hour, or you're going to be coming up to the Upper Valley and work at a convalescent facility making $17 an hour. So one of the things that we have to focus on is both ends of the spectrum as far as to build housing for those individuals. And someone that's making $38 an hour is not going to want to go into a housing sector that's built for somebody $17 an hour, let's face it. But the problem we have is, how do you as business leaders within the community address that need that you have to reach both ends of the spectrum? And the fact that we have the people that can pay that money right up front, and they're still gonna, because there's such a lack for housing, they're still gonna attack that lower income house just to get a place to live in until they can find someplace else. That's the difficulty that I see because of the housing market that we have. It doesn't matter whether you're making 38 or 17, that person making 38 is still gonna grab that house and get it off the market, so that person making 17 doesn't even have a chance. There's gotta be some way to address that's lacking here in Upper Valley. It's not just a Hartford issue. So I'm wondering if business leaders can speak on that, maybe, or town leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Lanny.
Sorry, I'm Lanny Collins. I'm one of your select board members. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and obviously one of the things that we're trying to, with projects like the Wentworth project that I mentioned earlier, trying to make sure that we're addressing the range of needs, because there's absolutely a challenge for people at, $38 an hour finding something just like there is at 17. So I think it's gotta be, we've been trying to do some of the mixed income projects that I mentioned, because I do think that that's a really important, factor out there in terms of getting people up here and being able to attract and retain people, because, people show up, and I think Clay mentioned earlier, people show up and they've got job offers and they turn around and say, I can't find housing. So it's a huge issue.
And I think there are restrictions on some of these types of projects where if you're making more than a certain amount, you're not gonna be able to rent one of those projects that is designed for someone who's at 17 an hour. And so that's already built into some of these programs, and Andrew was describing earlier some of the partnerships and the capital stack, it's called, all the different sources of money to build a project. If you're accessing this bucket of cash from that's coming from the federal government through the states, it has restrictions on who can actually occupy that based on their income. So those governors are kind of already in place on certain projects. Certainly not a market rate developer who's doing it for profit. They're gonna charge whatever the market's gonna bear.
That's the problem that we have in the Upper Valley.
A lot of the projects. Yeah, and so you can charge, a lot of the market rate developers are charging at the high end, and then unless there is a program like some of the ones Andrew's referencing, there's not a whole lot in between.
So I think really what we have to do is we have to find more partners like Vermont, for example. There are many people out there that are putting in units. And one of the things I have expressed an interest in is saying, having a pot of money, a resource, in which hopefully we will be having something in that realm, where somebody who's building 30 units of market rate housing, and I can go in there and say, I want 8 of those units.
Right.
And we're gonna finance 8 of those units in order to make them available, or 4 units, or whatever it is. So where there isn't necessarily somebody who has to say, okay, I'm gonna go one way or the other way, there can be an opportunity, because the cost of them putting together a project, there's a certain cost, a break-even cost that they need to have, and then there's a profit they wanna make. And every developer is gonna make a decision based on their own financing structure as to what they can afford. But if I could walk in there and say, give me 8 units, and we're gonna make them more available at a lower market rate, and it could be varying from different income levels, but it won't be somebody who's making $80,000 or $90,000 a year. It might be somebody who's making $60,000 a year. And then we'll have money in that resource to do it. So to me, it's a little here, it's a little there, it's a little everywhere. But if we're always going for the big gusto with the same partners, we're gonna have a hard time meeting our goals. So we've gotta get creative.
Yeah, one of the things I have seen other municipalities do is say, if you're gonna build 20 market rates, and you're gonna charge an arm and a leg for them, you know, the cost of doing business is either a few units at affordable housing with income restrictions, or you have to put some money in a pot. And the municipality uses that money to seed other programs like the Housing Revolving Fund, you know, works with community partners to build more things, you know, whatever it is that they use, and they use that to kind of help the people who were never going to be able to get that market rate condo. So those are some options that we can definitely look at in the future too. One of the things that we do have to consider is, you know, our biggest competitors, competitor cities. We have some sibling rivalries with Lebanon and Hanover, and how we balance making it still advantageous to build in Vermont and not keep people running. But I'm sure Lori has some deep, dark secrets of any developer that's gonna go over to New Hampshire, and we can keep them over here.
Tracy, I'd just like to say what you said sounds remarkably like a perfect use for impact fees. That's exactly what impact fees could be.
Well, ladies and
Lori and I are
gentlemen.
gonna have to have sandwiches later on this week to talk about
Well,
it.
ladies and gentlemen, our hour and a half is up. I want to thank Andrew, Clay, Lori, Tracy, and Kristen. Thank you in the audience for coming. Thank you at home for watching us. I wanted to dip Hartford's toe in the water to see if this format of a town hall is something that you would want. We have plenty of issues on the table, and hopefully we will address those issues. Thank you for joining us, and thank you as well.
Thank you, Joe Major. Thank you, Lori Hirschfeld.
I'm sorry, I probably repeated the Wentworth stuff, like I needed to put that one. You know, it is a good example, but you're right. I mean, you're right to sort of say,
long as you
yeah.
still, you know,
yeah, hey,
hold my hand every once in a while.